Hi everyone and welcome to my talk today. Thank you so much for joining. So what we are going to talk about is games equal subjective. So really focusing in on who your target player is and how we can try and utilize that to build a really engaging experience for them. So looking at jumping into it, I want you to imagine delivering a game, and this is aimed at all players, young, old, middle-aged for those that aren't in between, a puzzler, it's a battle royale, it has wizards, there's spacecraft. This is sounding really, really hectic, right? That is because you are focusing on absolutely everyone, and this can be such a huge problem, especially when you start thinking about what type of game you want to build. Even when you're building a game, you may potentially have a really, really huge target audience, and that can cause quite a lot of trouble. So what we're going to look at today is we're going to look at why you need player personas. So we need to look at the personas and understand what they are, and importantly, the benefits that you will gain from using them. And then we can kind of run in and understand, right, this is how we can create it. These are the elements and these are the key areas we want to focus on so that when you leave today, you should be able to craft your own persona for your game and deliver some great experiences for your players. Jumping in, the talk is not going to be all about me, but about personas. But before we do jump in, about me, so that we have a little bit of that connection. Who am I? This is a great question. So I'm a game producer at Wargaming Sydney, and I have come from a fintech background, so spent quite a few years in the financial industry, working on some really fantastic and exciting products. And then I've also worked on and dabbled in some IoT projects as well. So currently I work on the game side of things, and then also I have done a lot of work on the server tech, so more of the technical areas, understanding how to scale up your game. So kind of the full shebang, I have experienced this. Really exciting for me. Currently I'm working on a new AAA IP, which we are co-deving with a company called DPS Games over in the UK. And this is really, really great. So look forward to being able to showcase what that is once it finally releases. And just to add that small little personal touch as well. So my favorite food is Hawaiian pizza. It is the best, even though there may be potentially some controversy out there. And hopefully this little tidbit helps you just connect a little bit more to who I am. In terms of looking at what personas are, so this is why you joined today. This is what you're trying to crave and understand. So personas were developed roughly in the 90s, and this was really a means of using a way for gaining powerful insights about your target audience. So there is user personas, which you'll find, and they're very similar, except for player personas, there are some key differences, like focusing really in on the motivations and the goal side of things, which we will touch base on. So something to remember is personas are a representation of the needs of a greater group of player base. So usually the persona would depict a specific person, but not the real individual. Instead, they are a correlation of observations and research of many, many people who have the similar needs. So persona is really great for being able to understand your various player types as well. So there's two areas we want to focus on, and these are looking at what kind of personalities and player types you have. In terms of the player types, you can be approached from the perspective of segmentation. So this is around focusing around the marketing and distinguishing between the player profiling and the player modeling. So the player modeling is really about scrutinizing patterns and understanding the data behind them, whereas player profiling is not really focused on the gameplay side as the modeling is, but instead it focuses on some other motivations for the player. So what are their cultural backgrounds? What are their motivations? How are they going to experience this game? In terms of following on from this, we look at how a persona works. So knowing your user base is really going to make it really easy for you to remember when you start designing for them. The key thing that I have found super beneficial and really great as part of using personas is it allows you to step out of yourself. So I think we've all fallen into the trap of being in that delivery mode, wanting to get stuff done, and you're like, no, I don't like this. And there's a lot of guys and me's and we's, but there's not really a focus on who is the player, what are they wanting, and is this change that we're making really going to benefit them? So it's recognizing that different people have different needs and expectations, and it will really help you identify this when you're making those design decisions. And the persona is also about empathy, and it's not just used in low-level technical detail. It's really considering how is the user going to feel about this experience. So we look at personas, it turns this abstract concept of the user, the player, and it turns them into a person with thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And from this, I feel like there's really these key areas highlighted that we can try and achieve from them. Using personas are really great, and there's a few key areas because of this. So it's really focused on avoiding generalization. So again, you're not going to generalize and say, oh, this large portion of people would enjoy this experience or find this interesting. Instead, you're going to be able to hone in and really understand who you're serving for, who you're trying to achieve this delivery for. You'll be able to catch the right users. So you're focusing on the player segment instead of yourself. So that was the part about stepping out of yourself. And then we've also got the seize the moment. So the best time to really try and drive for personas are generally at the start of the design process. In terms of that, I know it's really difficult because who has time to do that at the start, and potentially it just becomes really difficult. Something I want to raise is, yes, it is great if you have the time and the ability to do that. By all means, do go and start this process during the initial kickoff of design. However, it doesn't need to be during the stage. So when myself and my team, when I jumped over to Wargaming Sydney, we were looking at the server tech side, and the team was doing a fantastic job, but looking at a very general view of who they were delivering for. They didn't have any personas or target audience of who they're trying to achieve. It was just, hey, we know game teams need this, so we're building this out thinking this is going to be the best situation that they would like. This is okay, but as we said, trying to build for everyone makes it really hard, and you end up with a very generalized approach and experience. So instead, what we did was we started doing our user personas, we had workshops, we did interviews, and from this, we really were able to understand who we're building for. And now our project, as a result, is much better for it. And this really jumps into how personas help. So it helps you being able to drive some of those process-related things as well. So from our side, there was a lot of things around using these and turning them into user stories so that we could understand from an epic level when we create our work, what does this mean for our player? What are we really trying to achieve from this chunk of work? As well as looking at the experience side when it's going into the gameplay. How is this going to interact with the team? How is this persona going to be able to have a great immersive experience because of what we're building? And it has been great. We've caught ourselves out a lot where you can have multiple personas, and potentially one of your features that you are building might not really line up with what your key persona is trying to convey. So being able to pull yourself back and be like, right, even though this is a fantastic feature that we're trying to build, this is not the experience that we want to try and cater for. And then you end up just scrapping it and starting again, which is fine. So it really helps to, instead of trying to develop a game which attempts to tailor to everyone, you can really start defining who these players are, who you're trying to build for. There's going to be a lot of data. So data is going to be really important. And depending on the amount of research you do is really going to affect how your persona is going to work. So in terms of the persona, you can gather data by, these days are really hard, but you can go online, you can do interviews, you can do workshops, really try and do as much as you possibly can. You can send out surveys with a bunch of questions and understand how people interact. As part of this, a great example of who has done this really well is Netflix. So Netflix, we all should know who they are, and they have gone past the general organizational setting and instead looked at, let's not satisfy everyone because this approach is really outdated and we all know we can't do this. Instead, they went and looked at what data people were providing them. So already being in the Netflix phase, people would be watching films and series, and they were basing their research off that. So they used big data as a means of analyzing their customer database and then looked at the patterns of their behaviors and the viewing habits of us, which is fantastic. I'm sure we're all happy because this is a great way for us to get an even better Netflix environment, especially with everything going on. And this is a great reason why you want to build on facts instead of presumptions. So looking at how do we create this persona? So it's fantastic. We've looked at why it's good, high level what it is, and the value that you could gain from doing it. Now let's really understand how we want to craft these player personas. And as part of that, we are going to look at how you can create this experience. So creating a user persona will make defining your game requirements and subsequently designing it much easier. The reason for this is it entails doing a lot of research, as we mentioned, into your main player base and understanding their segmentation. So really when you create your user persona, there's usually 3 steps to these. You want to gather all of the data about your users. You want to put the data together. So this was the scrutinizing patterns and understanding how people use it. And then you also want to do the creation of the user persona. So really that's the last piece. It's the build up to get to your persona that really matters. So before you begin gathering the data of your ideal user, there's a few crucial questions that you really want to try and understand and gain from this experience. So the first one, who is your ideal player? So who's going to be interacting with this game the most? How are they going to experience this? The second one is, what are the current behavior patterns of your players or your potential players? So this really helps you focus in on how are they going to interact and understanding some of that initial patterns which we mentioned. Then the third piece, which is the final one, what are the motivations and the goals for your user? This is super critical to you delivering a really unique and engaging experience to your player base. So being able to define the reason your product exists in the first place is something that this third question is really going to be able to cover. So if you don't understand the motivations or the goals for your player, how can you deliver a product that is going to be able to give them what they want? And this is where being generalized, being a super broad experience is not going to be valuable at all. So creating a persona. In terms of this, we are going to look and we have a really high level example. So there's a few ways that you can go about creating your persona. This is one which came from Quantic Foundry, which we're going to jump in a little bit around the player motivations especially. But in general, you would be able to have the persona, and it has information which contains the goals and contains the motivations of your player, and it can kind of flesh out as far as you really want it to be fleshed out. In terms of how you should create it, the less personas you have, the easier in general it's going to be to design for each one. And it's less likely that you're going to end up with this scope creep, which I'm sure we all know very well. In terms of this, sometimes you'll find that two groups can be fused into one persona, and they may share similar attributes as well, which is going to help you. Generally, each user persona is a representation of your ideal player, and then it comes to designing this persona. It can start becoming quite vast. So if you think about a Venn diagram where some features from your game potentially could overlap, this can then be combined and understood as the persona. It's also key to understand that you don't need just one persona. That is also, if you have a very, very specific demographic you're trying to achieve for, that is fine. But you can also have, I usually aim for about 2 or 3. So you've got your main one, which you're always going to try and deliver for, but there may be subsequent personas which also are going to engage with your player base. In terms of player motivations, this is something which I called out alongside goals, which are really key. Apart from the data piece, which this should help you gain the data that you're trying to put together for your persona. In terms of the motivation, the reason it is really just so important is we can understand and extract the motivations of our players and the different phases they're in. So the kind of gameplay experience that you want to design for is defined by your gaming motivations. And this can be a few different things. So you could decide that I want strategy or story, and from the game sense, you can decide where the motivations go and what you want to try and achieve. But then it's good because you're going to be testing your assumption. The experience in the game that I've come up with, when I test this with the player base, are these the strategies that come out most? Are these things that I really want to consider? So this diagram that I have representing on the screen at the moment, it has been done by a group called Quantic Foundry. I have linked them below. These folks have done a fantastic job. So they have gained data from over 450,000 gamers. This is astonishing. That is just step back a little bit. Imagine the vast amount of data that you are consuming. So what they have done is they have used this, and they have established some psychometric methods from these large bulks of data of the gamers to develop a model for the gamer motivations, which we see here. In terms of going into that, they also have the 12 motivations. So these identify the 12 unique motivations, which cluster into 6 pairs that we're going to jump into. Each of the columns here that you see have a pair of motivations which are highly correlated motivations, and other columns, so in terms of going on the other columns, and these are less correlated motivations for your players. So this should be pretty straightforward when you look at the graph and you see what some of these are, but we're just going to cover it. In terms of action, this is really focusing in on driving that chaos and mayhem side of things, and it's really going to be focused on being able to push the exciting, fast-paced gameplay styles which players are really after. Focusing in on social, it is really about the competition and socializing. So understanding how to collaborate between players and build those communities that really make the game tick. You've then got mastery. Mastery is really focused around planning, and your long-term thinking. So in terms of this, being able to strategize how you potentially could get through a level, it could be how can I get through a mission without getting spotted. So there's a bunch of different things that you can go through there. Achievements. This is around leveling up or getting rewarded for your player. And then you've got immersion, which is getting engaged with an elaborate story plot, or potentially being really entranced in being someone else, somewhere else. And especially today, I think this is something that's quite interesting. Creativity, which is the last one, this is around making your game your own. So being able to customize your character, create an avatar, or potentially for the discovery piece, seeing how far you can go on a map. How far in Skyrim can I go before the world ends and it's only flat? So this is that side of things. So as we mentioned, the columns are highly correlated, but not so much when you go further down. So in terms of this really started bringing to life 3 motivation clusters. Jumping into the motivation clusters, we can see here how they are grouped together. So you've got action and social, mastery, achievement, immersion, creativity, and then the subsequent things below that as well. In terms of this, they did a lot of factor analysis to understand how these variables in the clusters work together. As part of it, they also understood that how to get to this data. They went and did 50 key questions to extract from their survey how to immerse a player and how to bring this process to life. As you can see, these correlations, these are probably going to be the areas that you would focus on. So if you did have a game that had action, it probably would make a lot of sense for you to add social, because you can have the competition building on the excitement, building on the destruction in the community. And there's a lot of ways that these then start to interlink with each other. There's a lot of research that has been done around this field, and I would highly suggest that you start looking into it and understand how this could affect your game and your experience as well. So a great example that I wanted to jump through is Batman Arkham City.
Tonight. This will be easy, Batman. Arkham City is gonna be the last.
So again, a little tidbit about myself. Super fan of Batman, which is why this really made sense for me as well. So looking at Batman, the combat mechanics is really easy to pick up, but it's difficult to master. So by methodically mastering the combat and using the gadgets in a unique way, it allows the players to build up their combo meters, and this is really focusing in on the strategy side of things as well. They allow for a kind of rhythm and flow in the combat, which is really enjoyable for the players. And there's 2 player types that I can see, which is you have your new player, which really wants to focus on basic combat. And then you've got your experienced player, which is really focusing on the side of things, which is, hey, I want mastery. I want to be able to strategize and advance and be rewarded. And this is really a great combat system Batman has built over time. Bear in mind that it never used to be like this. Arkham Asylum, which was brought out quite a few years ago, it was super basic in combat and didn't have that mastery side of things, which we wanted to drop. Instead, in Arkham City, they went and really radicalized the combat experience, which has been great for our player base as well. So as part of this, they allowed for a smooth difficulty curve. And I think this has really helped introduce some great dynamics between building out for two personas and being able to have them have very similar experiences, but achieving their various motivations they have in the game. So I think this is a really good example if you want to think about combat and how to utilize a persona to build for two different player types and personas. We're quickly going to touch base in terms of Hitman as well. So Hitman Absolution, again, fantastic game. Please do play it if you haven't played it before. They also focus on different play styles. So away from the combat, we're looking at the play styles that you allow. And the game is designed to be played in various different ways. So you can play as a silent assassin, you're super stealthy, and you can get through the map without killing someone or just submitting them without being spotted.
Like 2 or 3 car blocking accident in lane 3 to 4.
Look at this place. You read?
No, I can't say I do.
Good. Waste your time. Books are the root of all evil.
I don't know about you, that is not my play persona, and I absolutely suck at stealth games. But super lucky that this is kind of the opposite. If I want to play this, I can use my persona, which is the gun blazer. I really just want to get through and be able to do what I want and get to the end of the mission and get some rewards. I think this is the key thing. They really help try and showcase the two different play types that you can have. And this ties in again. You have two different persona types, and they are trying to focus, and they have different motivations for play, which cross over, but you're giving two unique experiences as well. In terms of the experience goals, so this is something we also raised as being super important for our players. And a player goal is really described as the kind of gameplay experience you want your players to have. So thinking about Telltale games, which I also hope you have heard about and you have played because it is some amazing gameplay, it really focuses in on the gaming motivations and how this can bring forth the experience goals. So the motivations they potentially would have used for the game itself would have been fantasy, story, strategy, and excitement. So these are likely the four key things that motivation-wise they would have been focusing on. From there, they can then distill the player experience goals that the game can describe. So if they were to set up what the experience goals are for their Walking Dead Telltale's games, it would be that players will feel scared and uncertain as they try and survive a world filled with zombies. It could also be players will have to quickly make decisions affecting the character they care about the most. And so you'll notice a few things in those sentences and in those goals that really drive home. So the player experience goals relates back to the target gaming motivations, which we just covered. So an example is the scared and uncertain. That really pulls back to the excitement factor. They're trying to survive is strategy. A world filled with zombies is the fantasy. We know this isn't real, so this ties in strongly. We've got quickly, which relates to the excitement, and then again, difficult decisions, that is around strategy. And so you can see how your motivations you have set and you understand from your player then ties into what experience goals you're trying to set out and how these complement each other really well. So the player experience goal also focuses on how the player is going to feel. So they don't just focus on the specific game feature, but they also focus on the experience goal and later use that to help design the specific game features. So a great thing that you can notice when you play the game is the lighting and the effects that they have. And these try and create that feeling of a scary environment, and it builds on top of those motivations. And then lastly, just on the topic of the experience goals, they help narrow down your thinking of the game design ideas as well. So they will give you the ability to go broad enough and in order to allow you to have a range of game designs, but your team will also be able to develop at least one player experience goal based on what they're trying to set up from their motivations, which is really exciting. And I hope this highlights why motivations and goals, I will push this home again, are super key to having a successful persona. So this really starts concluding for us, and the key takeaway I want you to have is, without a doubt, the user personas and the player personas are really important and play a fundamental part of your design journey, as well as product, as well as QA, really the whole shebang. So what we have gone through today, and we'll quickly recap, we have learned that player personas are a representation of your target player, and it helps you step outside of yourself and not build a solution for you, but for who you are targeting. We understand the value it delivers by allowing you to avoid generalization, and it catches the right users and it seizes the moment. It can also be used as a tool to get buy-in through different stakeholders and groups, and you can get your whole team on board to use this process moving forward. Along with this, we know personas look and how they are crafted, which is really key. And there's also some tools that you can use, like HubSpot, to create it if you're not as creative as myself or some design folks. I know when I started it, I did lean personas, and that's all you need. You can continue building on top of those. And then lastly, we're focusing on the motivations and the goals. And going through that, we understand the reason why these are really core drivers to your experience in engaging your target audience. I hope you gained some really wonderful and powerful insights throughout this journey. And if you have any questions, always feel free to reach out. But I implore you to, again, research Content Foundry and what they have done in the motivations field, and this will help drive to you having a fantastic and successful relationship with player personas and what you're trying to deliver for your team. Thank you so much, everyone, and hope you have a fantastic